And then if we will unmute you. So if you see the unmute button pop up on your screen, please click unmute and then you can speak. And that just helps us sort of keep the meeting quiet and organized so everyone can hear each other. All right, so here's our agenda for today. I'm very excited that I'm going to introduce Danica Shaw in a moment. She's our neighborhood ambassador, and I'll tell you a little bit more about her and the program, followed by I'm going to do a brief overview of the study, and then I'm going to introduce Danica. Then we're going to have a great panel discussion today with the 3 practitioners in the affordable housing study field, and it's going to be a great and dynamic discussion, followed by a case study of a couple different affordable housing developments, one in Raleigh, one in Charlotte, that we thought had some good precedent for what we're trying to accomplish with this. Then we'll do some small group discussions, report back, and next steps, and then we will be out of here before lunch today. Well, before lunch today.
Yeah, 10:30.
Yes. We promise we will have you out of here at 10:30 and we will be prompt. So I'm just going to give a brief overview of this, and then I'm going to introduce Danica and speak a little bit on what her role is and something that we've been trying here with engagement. So just for folks who may not be familiar with the Dix Edge area study, it's an 18-month planning study focused on the areas on the right-hand side of your screen. So if you see that map there, it's the neighborhood sort of to the south of Dix Park. That's how it's got its name, Dix Edge. It's sort of the neighborhoods on the edge of the park, if you will, but then beyond the park as well. So it's the neighborhoods that are south of MLK Western Boulevard, that are west of Wilmington Street, and then sort of north of Carolina Pines Avenue. That's our border there. And then Lake Wheeler Road is the border on the western side. So generally speaking, it's Carolina Pines, Gateway Park, Walnut Terrace, Carolee, Fuller Heights. So we did our public kickoff in October, and we've been steadily working through learning what the community is wanting and needing to see in the area. And the study focuses on the topics that you see on the left-hand side in green. So looking at equity, how can we explore different policy tools that can help prevent displacement, affordable housing, land use, development form and economic development, and the two probably go together quite well as well. So that's kind of an overview. We're not going to get too deep into the study today. And actually, I'm going to ask if Warren, if you could unshare your screen for one moment. I'd like us to be able to see each other for the next piece. I'm just going to give a couple remarks on Danica Shaw, our ambassador, and then I'm going to kick it over to her, and she's going to sort of open up the summit and welcome us. So thanks again for joining us this morning. I know it is an early day for this much content, so I really appreciate having you all here. To kick off the summit, it's my pleasure this morning to introduce Danica Shaw. She's the City of Raleigh's first neighborhood ambassador. The neighborhood ambassadors are 2 community members who work with the city as part of the Dix Edge area study to help with outreach and engagement. They serve as a bridge to build trust between the city and our residents. Danica is a resident of the study area, and she's here today to set the stage for the summit by speaking on why she got involved, why affordable housing and housing choice for people at all income levels is important. So we're all here for the same goal. We're here to talk about how we can best serve the community by ensuring the housing supply is right for the needs of our residents. And we can't have that conversation without hearing the resident perspective. So Danica was kind enough to offer to give our welcoming remarks, and I'm going to turn it over to her. And if we could all please welcome her this morning, she's going to talk a little bit about why this is important.
Unmute.
Hello, everyone. I'm Danica Shaw. I'm your neighborhood ambassador. I lived in the area for several years. I care about my job. I care about reaching out to the community, and I care about the residents' concern. I want to focus on let's create affordability with diversity. Low-income families under $30,000 yearly income have lived in the community for several years. These families have built a culture and stability for their families. When they are asked to move out of the area, due to the ideal of some investors want to make money to fit their own interests, it shows displacement for low-income families and feel as they are not welcome in the neighborhood. Middle-class income residents should not be forced to move to rural areas outside of the Beltline due to the minimum house is at least $500,000 and rent is at least $3,000 a month for a single family home. homeowners and renters want to live in the area that focus on plan and development for everyone. Higher income residents want to live in a clean and safe neighborhood. We understand that these residents want the area to fit certain images to keep money flowing in the area that help with economical growth. These changes can occur without gentrification in the Dix Edge area. When I read and hear the media response that the white population increased to 259% in the Dix Edge area that was dominant minorities, it raises concern to African Americans and Spanish residents. It helped me to remember an article that read by Dr. Whitmont A. Carter that stated, in 1916, there was not a white person on any other property. Then the whites began to pay high prices for properties. Then they tried to run the Negroes out of Overland Road and the Cameron Village area. This looks very similar to what is happening in the Dix Edge area study community today, like Gateway, Harrison Park, Curry Lee, Fullers, Carolina Pines, and several areas that surrounded the Dorothy Dix Park. These neighborhoods were historically built by minorities that was homeowners and renters. Also, the area that surrounded the Dix Park has historical Black colleges like Shaw and St. Augustine University to help educate and develop the growth of our minorities in the 1800s. Black homeowners want to receive the same value for their home just as other races in the Dix Edge area. We can keep the Dix Edge area that surrounded the Dorothy Dix Park community together by helping each other, respecting each other, and focus on the improvement of the culture that is already present in the area. We can bring in business for everyone, like Amazon and Walmart, that receive shoppers from different income levels. Also, we can build restaurants in the area where we can have enough money to buy dessert after ordering the entree at the dinner table. Investors and property owners can avoid increasing the home and rent above 50% AMI because some people are frustrated about the unpleasantness that is occurring in the neighborhood. We hope to have a vision that focuses on plan and development of the Dix Edge area study with diversity.
Thanks for grounding us, Danica, and setting the stage for why we're all here today. We appreciate you and all the service you've given the city. All right, so I'm going to kick it over to Russ now, and he's going to take it from here. And also, questions are welcome in the chat, questions, comments, so I'll be monitoring that throughout the meeting.
Well, thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Danica. That's kind of why we're here. This needs to be a plan for Dix Edge that sort of meets a variety of different needs. And what I wanted to do in starting off is sort of get you a little background of some of the forces that are sort of shaping this effort and some of the things that will be occurring over the next 5 years that will help us improve conditions on the ground. My name is Russell Archambault, Vice President and Principal of RKG Associates. I'm a part of the RHI team. I wanted to thank you all for coming this morning. This is a very important topic for the city of Raleigh, and the city of Raleigh is really doing more than a lot of communities are trying to get at this issue. And we really wanted to bring together your expertise and your interest in this topic so we could sort of understand what our opportunities are. This graphic sort of shows a growing disparity between median household income since the Great Recession in 2010. Basically, housing prices have been increasing, both rental and ownership or for sale, by about 48%. Household incomes have been growing about 28%. Now, household incomes have actually gone up quite a bit since 2015, but they just can't keep pace with the rising cost of housing in Raleigh. Here's what our target is as a city. 5,700 unit goal for affordable housing. These are new units by 2026, roughly 570 units per year, doing a pretty good job at meeting that. Over the next 5 years, this is one of the ways that we're going to be able to fill out that goal. Another 3,261 new affordable units are supposed to come online. Last year's Affordable Housing Bond Fund is going to help us get there in many respects. There's other money associated with this effort that are not shown here, other federal dollars, other local dollars, but this is the lion's share. Here's some of the tools that the city can use. It doesn't use all of them right now, but has a variety at its disposal. A lot of these are driven by the bond fund and its ability to incentivize affordable housing development. So we'll be looking for ways to deploy these tools as best as possible to achieve the goals. Now let's talk specifically about Dix Edge. Interesting things that have been going on. Danica sort of mentioned the origins of the neighborhood, mostly for homeowners and some renters way back when it was originally established. What we've seen in the data is that today, 61% of all the housing units are occupied by renter-occupied folks, households. Only 27% are by owner occupants, and nearly 55% of the total housing structures are really built for owner occupants. They're single-family homes. So that's sort of telling that there's a transition occurring, probably has been occurring over several decades, but it could be a lot of reasons why people have moved out over time. Maybe they've moved to the suburbs. Maybe they were given an offer they couldn't refuse from investors. I'll show you some information in a little bit that sort of drives that point home, but there's definitely a transition occurring right now. We need to start with a definition. You all are practitioners for the most part, and you're familiar with these terms. To the extent that there's some community residents on, they probably have heard this too. Typically, affordable housing is sort of no more than 30% of a household's gross monthly income is spent on housing costs. A lot of people spend more than that, but they're considered cost burden. So we're trying to keep it in that range. The median household income in Dix Edge is a little under $40,000 a year, which if you look on the right, that sort of gives them the sort of buying power for roughly $1,000 per month on housing expenses. That's probably 12-15% below the city of Raleigh's median rent. Now, there is a level of affordability already in the neighborhood, and we've sort of given you a sort of a scan of some of the current apartment communities and what their rents are. Generally speaking, this is considered affordable rents, as compared if you were to go ahead maybe a quarter mile north into downtown, you would see rents jumping up from $1,100 for a studio to up to $3,500 for a 3-bedroom or 2-bedroom, I should say, in a high amenity environment, contemporary apartment building. Now, the reason I mention that is because there's the prospects that in the near term, there's going to be the creation of new apartments in Dix Edge that are going to be probably more like downtown than what's there right now. And roughly 4,350 new units are tied to 2 projects, Downtown South and Park City South. And those are going to roll out over many years, but I think it's sort of it's giving us a window into the future. I think that could sort of reset the rental market for Dix Edge and be probably beyond the means of the people who are living there now. On the ownership side, the pressures have not been as intense in terms of price pressures, although they are rising and people are noticing those. Over 52% of the stock is really priced at $200,000 and below. That's basically attainable by someone who is sort of more moderate income. But beyond that, prices are starting to get higher and higher, and people are expressing concerns that they're noticing these things. They're getting approached by people who are looking to buy their homes. But the home ownership opportunities in Dix Edge they're diminishing every day. Here's what I sort of alluded to before. You'll note that what the city has tried to do is track the owners with multiple properties, and we have to assume that these are probably investor owners who are either positioning their properties for something larger in the future, or they're sort of assembling properties so to have an investment portfolio. I think that's more emblematic of some of the early acquisitions. It may speak to why some people have left the neighborhood. But if you look at the timing of those, you see that much of this activity has occurred since 2010. If you recall, that recession was sort of driven by a financial crisis and a housing crisis and a foreclosure crisis. And we can't link all these acquisitions to foreclosure deals, but suffice it to say that there's been more activity in the last 10 years on larger projects, larger parcels. And that sort of speaks to maybe what we're up against and what we need to be prepared to address as we move forward on this effort. So what I wanted to do is sort of bring our experts to the table, and I'll introduce them in a second, but we wanted to have a conversation that everyone can sort of participate in around a set of issues. We can deviate from this, but basically the one topic, which will be sort of addressed by Nathan Spencer, Wake Up, Wake County, is really dealing with the approach to affordable housing and interacting with the community and engaging them, giving them a seat at the table, where in the past maybe that seat was never offered. I think they need a voice, and Wake Up Wake County is often filling that role in the community. Secondly, we'll talk about this sort of growing interest or conversation about voluntary inclusionary affordable housing, sort of a long-winded way of saying working with private sector market rate developers to have them build some percentage of their units as affordable. There are no requirements in North Carolina that make this necessary, but I think more developers are sort of starting to see the opportunity or the need and at least open to that conversation. And finally, that will be sort of led by Mark Shelburne of Novogradac. And then we'll talk to Greg Warren, who's the former past president of DHIC, about how he has been successful in the past in building affordable housing communities through partnerships, looking at creating various housing options, and starting to sort of raise the bar in terms of what affordable housing looks like today, because it has changed over time. So allow me to sort of give a little bit of brief introduction, to our speakers, and then we'll get into the conversation. Nathan is the recently named acting director of Wake Up Wake County. He comes from sort of a nonprofit background. He's also been an entrepreneur and started some businesses up in Boston. He's a background in planning and transportation, and so he's really coming from the advocacy side of this issue, and also is sitting on the Raleigh Transit Authority board. So he has that perspective, which is important to this neighborhood or this study area, because BRT is scheduled to come through here. Mark is a housing policy consultant. He's a national speaker. His expertise is sort of on the finance funding side of affordable housing. He helps states allocate their low-income housing tax credits. He is an advisor to many in the process, financing agencies, state agencies, local governments. He's been involved in projects that have resulted in the creation of 25,000 units of affordable housing throughout the country. So he has a perspective here that is national in focus. Greg, as I mentioned, is sort of a thought. He is sort of the centerpiece of much of what happens in Raleigh in terms of affordable housing. He's been at this for 34 years as the former past president of DHIC. They created, through his staff and their partners, 2,700 affordable apartments across 9 counties. He's the go-to person in this region. So that being said, I'd like to sort of kick the conversation off and have you, Nathan, sort of start us off. In our conversations in the past few weeks, you've talked about the need for a holistic strategy to address affordable housing. You're obviously sort of working on the BRT planning. This is an important area of the city. What elements sort of become part of that holistic strategy?
I appreciate you asking it, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you to the City of Raleigh for letting us be part of this. The Dix in the Dix Edge area is really just a small, very, very small portion of overall Wake County, but it's a large opportunity for precedent and large opportunity to have an impact across multiple areas. And because of the variety of transportation that's going to be coming through here, BRT, commuter rail, and other sorts, the fact that the City of Raleigh wants Dix Park to be that destination, we need to get that involvement, and we need to get people connected, but we also need all sorts of affordable housing opportunities within there, because quite honestly, our system works off of essential workers. We saw that no better than this pandemic. I guarantee you that if our essential workers are traveling 45 minutes to here because they're outside the Beltline or further away, Wendell's going to have an amazing city center with the best restaurants, because business owners will move to where their workers are. So we have to find ways to be able to provide good affordable housing amongst others, amongst all the real estate and growth that we're seeing and development that we're seeing.
Thank you. Greg, I just wanted to sort of touch on that topic with you in terms of the approach to affordable housing and sort of the need for some economic stratification, people at different income levels. What's been your experience in creating communities and the importance of having that distribution of incomes and different people?
Sure. Well, again, thank you for pulling me out of semi-retirement to get on the stage again. But yeah, I think that DHIC has done this in a couple different contexts. And let me just mention to you that one of my first developments at DHIC was Wheeler Crossing in the Fuller Heights neighborhood. And that's a 46 unit single family subdivision that was really one of the city's first kind of entrances into affordable housing. And that the history of that property is that it was going to be rezoned for industrial. And the city councilor at that point in time, Miriam Block, wanted to strengthen the neighborhood and see housing come into that neighborhood first. And so back in the late 80s, we built 46 homes for first-time home buyers, 1,100 square foot homes. And those were selling for in the low 60s. And we had down payment assistance available. And we even had some shared equity appreciation and the like. And I was just looking at kind of the ownership structure there. And a lot of those home buyers back in the late 80s who purchased those homes are still there. And I'm really pleased to see that. But I do think that it's important to have a mix of incomes and developments. And one thing that people don't understand oftentimes is that when we do a rental development, we do have a mix of incomes typically. It's required by our various funding sources. So we may have in our rental developments, some folks at 30% of the median income, some folks at 40 or 50, and some folks 60 and above. But another way to do this, I think, is to scale out a little bit. Over in Cary, we did Highland Village, and that had a mixture of both rental and homeownership developments there, townhouses for sale. And we're doing that again, obviously, at Washington Terrace. So I do think that that's an important element. It can't always happen in developments, but I think that from a perspective as a affordable housing developer, I think that it's important to have diversity of incomes even in rental developments that are targeted broadly to those with low incomes.
Do you believe that having market rate elements in those developments are important, or is that not always the focal point?
Well, we have done that. We have done mixed income, or we've had market rate units in our developments. It's harder to finance, as Mark Shelburne will tell you. There's not a lot of appetite among investors for those types of projects. But if you go to higher cost communities like Boston or the like, you'll see much more of that activity. And I think we're going to see more of that here in our marketplace too, particularly if there are public-private partnerships, whereby there might be land being sold by the city or the county, and they may want to have that as an outcome.
Nathan, I wanted to follow up with you about the role that Wake County plays in this arena. You know, so much of discussion right now is about equity and shared benefits for all. And you find yourself at the middle of some of those conversations and are trying to mediate and bring them forward. What are you hearing people say about this issue? And what should people expect to get out of that process when Wake County is at the table and sort of furthering the conversation?
I appreciate that question. I do want to make it clear, we don't speak for people. We will bring their voices forward. We'll let elected officials hear from people, but we don't want to paraphrase experiences and the way people's backgrounds, because we don't necessarily have the same one. So what we try to do is lift voices and make sure that folks have a chance to be in front of those decision makers. And we're hearing a lot of that need. I think that this goes across multiple different areas, transit projects that are going on and large development projects. And it sort of has the same theme, which is that people need to be heard. They need to be part of the process. And it's not so much that people need to be included when, you know, we're going forward and we're going to put something in and it would be great. They need to be part of the process early on, like what's being done here, where the discussion is being started, and they need to be early on at that point. Because folks, especially folks who live this experience, whether they're living in affordable housing or not, they share the experience of what the neighborhood's going to look like in the future, and they set the precedent. So it's very important for developers to bring them along. Otherwise, it will become a stumbling block along the way.
It might be a good opportunity where we have quite a few people who have joined us over the last half hour. Might be a good time to sort of break and see what people, what they have on their mind, if they have any questions. If you do, we can entertain a couple. Anyone have a question or comment to make? Sarah, do you see anything?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I think Greg Warren alluded to this. This is Ken Bowers with the City of Raleigh. In major metro markets, the 80-20 product financed with 4% LIHTC is a very common solution in denser areas. Is that something that we ever see could come to North Carolina and be a feasible product here?
There have been a couple of those in Charlotte. I don't know of any others. And it has to do with the business model of the developers and the funding sources. Because from a numbers perspective, it makes all the sense in the world, but it requires, again, developers and funding sources who are willing to engage in that type of activity. And you're right that it happens in places like Manhattan all the time, but in the only ones I know of, again, are in Charlotte. I think it was Bank of America CDC did one. So it's a circumstance where it's not about how the economics of it work. It's whether the participants are willing to learn how to do it and do the underwriting risk analysis of it.
But you don't see any barriers locally or with the housing finance agency or the QAP to pursuing this model in North Carolina. It's really more of a demand side.
Well,
issue.
it's not, well, there may be some components of the QAP that could be tweaked, but the agency would be open to that with the right kind of input. It's really about that being a subspecialty of real estate development. Basically, the folks involved have to know both market rate and affordable development, and it's really hard to find folks that are truly comfortable being fully committed to doing both. And I guess one financial component of it is it would need to be a really large project, because you're only getting 20% of the units, or maybe if you have a little bit of cushion, 25%
Right.
are generating the housing credit, which means it's actually not that much equity going into it. And investors need a certain amount for it to be worth doing it all, because the transactional costs don't vary based on the size of the project. The attorneys and the accountants get paid the same, whether it's 10 units or 10,000 units. And so you have to have a certain amount to merit making that kind of expense. So it would have to be a really big project, but there are plenty of opportunities around to do that. You just have to find someone who's up for that kind of work.
Okay, thank you.
Another way to do that, and I don't want to get too much in the weeds on this, but over in Durham, the city of Durham put out an RFP to redevelop the old police station on a 4-acre tract of land. And the winning developer was a joint venture between the Fallon companies out of Boston, I believe, as well as Wynn companies, an affordable housing manager and development group. And what they're proposing to do in that transaction is basically do a mixed income apartment building, and whereby they would condominiumize the development such that the tax credit units would be in a separate ownership structure from the market rate units, but the units would be scattered throughout the development. So it would be a lawyer's feast of just extraordinary costs just to pull that off.
Right. Separating out the property into different condos
Yes.
can actually work really well, and actually oddly be less complicated, although Greg's right, you have to spend a lot with attorney's fees to get that structure set up.
Let me go to Ms. Shaw. You had your hand up earlier. Did you have a comment you want to make or a question?
Yes, I just want to follow back with the statistics and data that was shown earlier by Russell.
Yep.
I know you stated it was $9.96 per month for 30% AMI for Dix Edge, and the city Raleigh gross rent, which is $11.21.
Yeah.
I asked, what is the zip code of that area?
Well,
Mhm.
go ahead.
And what type of properties of this include regarding numbers of bedrooms?
Well, it's all bedroom and it's all rental properties, so it doesn't make that distinction. And the Dix Edge number is from the census tracts that make up that area, and the city number is just a citywide number. So these are very sort of gross measures. They're not the detail that most people deal with on a daily basis. So they want to know what's it cost for a 2 or 3 bedroom apartment. That's not sort of reflecting that.
Okay, because I live in zip code 27601, and there's not a property on site that you can find in a minimum of $9.96 or $11.21.
Good point. Thank you. And that's, I think, what we're seeing more of, that people are seeing that prices are rising, both on the for sale side and the rental side. And I don't see an abatement of that coming up. You know, Mark, in terms of sort of transitioning from
Russ, I'm sorry.
I'm
If
sorry.
I may, Danica, I'm going to keep talking to you about that because I think you make a good point, and we underplay the realities of the housing market, and what you're saying is right. It's not looking good out there, and I want to acknowledge that because you're right. Sorry, Russ. I saw Jackie had a hand raised, and then I think we could, and then I'll hand it back over to you, but I just wanted to make sure we caught that one.
Okay. I don't see Jackie, so.
Hey, I'm
Jackie,
here. Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much. Hey, everybody, Jackie with the Community Committee for Dix Park. I'm interested, I really agree with what was said earlier about like folks being involved in the process and needing to, needing engagement and conversation around housing in Raleigh. And one question I have, I think it's really important to engage those folks, but it's also really important simply just to provide housing that is affordable. And I may have missed this at the beginning, but I'm curious, are any of the planned affordable developments in the Dix Park Edge study area or nearby? And I think I may have just missed that in your presentation.
Well, some are there now. I'm not aware of new proposed affordable housing developments in Dix Edge. So we're talking about what might come in the future, in what form. The projects that are sort of have come before the planning board are larger mixed-use developments, probably mixed income on some level, but maybe not affordable. It'll be probably towards the higher end. I'm speculating a little bit.
Okay, thank you. That was the impression I had. Thank you.
Thank you.
But could
yes.
I also back up something that Danica was saying? One of the things that she said in her introduction was sort of the concern of being pushed out of the Beltline and further out. And one of the things that we need to keep very clear when we're investing in our communities is that we're doing probably close to $1 billion worth of transit work within Raleigh or the surrounding area over the next decade. And that if we're investing that and our transit reliant population is being pushed out to places where there isn't transit, then we're not investing our money well. And so affordable housing has to be affordable with transit as well, and it has to get access to it. Because if we're forcing Danica to have to buy a car at $10,000 a year, then whatever the house we help her get is not as affordable as it could have been. So I just wanted to note that, and she's very right on all of that.
That's a real good point. I mean, it's a major investment for Raleigh, and it should benefit a broad cross-section of the community. But that doesn't happen without some deliberate efforts. And Mark, there's been some discussion since we have started this project that market rate developers could have a greater impact in this arena of affordable housing. And we've talked before about this, and the question of involuntary or voluntary affordable housing is sort of developers coming to the table, receiving density bonuses in exchange for some level of affordability. That seems kind of straightforward, and we know that the demand is high for affordable housing. But you have a sort of different take on this in the sense that may seem logical, but it may not be the best fit. Can you describe that a little bit?
Sure, and I'll just give a little broader context and then get to that particular question. So any jurisdiction's response to the affordable housing crisis has to be multifaceted. There's no one solution, no one answer to what is truly a market failure. The market does not respond to the needs, the housing needs, the lowest income with anything but substandard structures. That's what we've learned throughout history, see it throughout the world, and it actually still happens here in America today. So subsidies are necessary, government intervention is necessary. So that said, market rate developers do have a role in helping to alleviate the crisis, in that they, by responding to the demand for new housing production, they help limit what are pressures created by new household production, people moving in, people having kids, et cetera. When market rate developers are not able to respond to that demand, the housing crisis gets worse. And that's a summary of what happened in the Bay Area. That's why San Francisco is such a disaster with regard to housing affordability. The job creation exceeded housing production by something like a 5-to-1 ratio. You just can't do that. But again, market rate developers will not themselves be the solution. They can be part of the solution. And I am a bit of a contrarian when it comes to the notion of the specific concept, though, of voluntary inclusionary housing. And there's several reasons for it. One of them, though, that I really like to have folks understand is it's not just about the numbers. There's a lot of people who think, well, if we just offer enough of a density bonus, if we give enough trade-off, maybe waive fees, et cetera, that there's a series of incentives that will make it so that the market rate developer will gladly provide housing affordability. And from an economic theory perspective, that makes sense. The problem is that a lot of market rate developers, from a psychological perspective, will not accept the idea of having a government official looking over their shoulder for however many years, and with regard to how they run their property. The notion of having to get approval for who to rent to, how much to charge to them. In my world, coming from an affordable housing perspective, that's second nature. But to a market rate developer, they'd rather get a root canal. And so and I'm not saying that they're wrong or bad. That's just that they got into their business because that's one of the things that they don't want to do. And again, that's not a critique. It's simply an observation. And so that's something that, going into that concept, you've got to realize it's not just about the numbers.
So it's just a classic square peg, round hole that we're trying to force someone into a role that they're just not comfortable doing or not interested in doing.
Well, right. And then there's the notion that I mentioned earlier in response to Ken's question, that market rate and affordable housing are truly different types of real estate. They involve different financial and underwriting considerations. And so even if you can find a developer who is willing to undertake both of those, and there are some, DHIC is a great example. They've done both types of housing, but most participants in that world do one or the other. And the same is true in the financial side, the debt and the equity. They are used to underwriting one kind of product or the other. I don't know the specifics, but I know there was a property in the last few years in Chapel Hill which was attempting to do this, and as I understand it, ran into serious difficulty in finding funding. They couldn't find, I don't remember if it was debt or equity, that was willing to underwrite the risks, appreciate the circumstances for both types of housing. And we may think that that's a bad circumstance. Someone may critique it, but whether it's good or bad doesn't matter. It's just the reality, and it's not going to change because a particular city wants it to be different. Right. And I know that's a bummer message, but it's better to know that than to go into something hoping for a different outcome.
That may be true, and I think it sort of points to the fact that we may need to take a different tack, different approach, different strategy to sort of fulfill the needs that are going unmet, and rather than maybe beat that nail over the head continually. Now, Greg, you sort of lived in that world. Affordable housing is a specialty development form, and there's expertise that are germane to that don't carry over in all cases. What's your thought about that issue, and how do we sort of build the capacity for that type of development?
Right. Well, again, I think that Mark is essentially correct that the market rate developers, are not enthusiastic, even with any kind of juicy carrots, we might call them, that the city may offer to provide affordable in the typical development. I do think there is an opportunity if you have local government controlling the land or institutions covering the land, then there could be that opportunity. So for example, the Rust Bus downtown Raleigh, that Triangle Go solicited proposals from developers to do the bus transfer facility downtown. It did have an ever so modest component of affordable housing in that particular our request for proposals that was sent out. So that, and so there will be some affordable housing built there. And we've seen this in Durham too, where they've put out land on and requesting proposals. So that can happen in that fashion. I do think, there's two ways to deal with the affordable housing issue in Raleigh and anywhere. One is preservation and two is new construction. And so I think we need to have both strategies in play here in Raleigh. And to be honest with you, we're not doing real well on the preservation side of things.
Yeah.
We're seeing how many different apartment communities that were traditionally affordable, older apartment communities, market rate apartment communities that were affordable that are coming down, and they continue to come down.
Can you talk a little bit about that, how an affordable community or a complex will become a market rate over time?
Well, what we've seen mainly is demolition of those existing communities. The Palms in Raleigh, inside the Beltline, was an older apartment community, and that was demoed. Out in North Hills, similar types of activities have occurred, and higher end stuff put in there.
Yep.
So it's all location based. I think obviously, what's happening in Southeast Raleigh with new housing coming in, we haven't done a good job of preserving or supporting perhaps the existing homeowners there as they're faced with increased property taxes because their land is indeed more valuable. So I think that there's, I guess, as I look at Fuller Heights, for example, that community, I'm familiar with that, and since we did Wheeler Crossing many years ago, but there are a lot of investor owners there. So should there be some activity to support the existing homeowners there if they want to stay? Or is it just simply, they just wait for the best possible deal and sell? What kind of activities can be there? So in some ways, it's almost like you need to have a community organized and communications. And maybe that's happening there, I do not know, through Nextdoor or other means of social media. But I think that we've got to do more in preservation. But in terms of new construction, I mean, it all comes down to land. And so we need to do better trying to find opportunities to acquire land and financing mechanisms to do that as well.
Mark, when we were talking originally, you had mentioned that the omnibus bill at the end of 2020 sort of made some opportunities available that weren't available before at the same level. Can you speak to that at all in terms of what new, maybe 4% tax credit deals, that sort of thing?
Right. So the law enacted at the end of 2020 changed the calculation for the one of the two types of low-income housing tax credits, and so it made the resource that goes along with tax-exempt bond financing substantially more consequential. Those properties now can realize anywhere from 25 to 30% more subsidy than they did before. So deals that couldn't pencil, that had irreconcilable gaps, now many of them no longer have those gaps and could move forward. And so it's an opportunity for, and how it relates to the circumstance is the city could make happen deals that previously maybe wouldn't have been able to happen. And so, and those could be either new construction or preservation, rehabilitation. And it's one of the points I'd come in here to say is that that the city could be strategic and directive about how that happens, because even with this additional resource, a lot of these properties still need gap funding, which the city has, and even without that, just the notion of having support from staff, support from council to move forward is really compelling and challenging, because that's one of the things that every developer, when they're thinking about a project, has to factor in is, will I be able to get this approved and at all, and will I be able to get it approved quickly, and knowing that that's less of a challenge substantially changes the thinking about whether to move a project forward.
So historically, 9% tax credit deals, highly competitive across the country. Hard to know, if you're going to get access to those deals. 4% have not been as competitive, only because they weren't quite as sweet. But you're suggesting that that's not the same case anymore, and could we see more competition there?
Oh, absolutely. The state saw a doubling of the number of units among preliminary applications submitted in January from 2020 to 2021. And that was really even before the 4% minimum kicked in. And so we could see that there's another application round that opens in May. And so we could see a dramatic increase. For example, Tennessee saw when it opened its round in January, $300 million worth of bond requests, and so that represents, roughly $600 million worth of real estate. That I'm very much estimating, just to give you an idea of the amount of activity. So you think about how much typical unit costs, and so that's a lot of proposals, and so North Carolina, it could follow suit in when that application cycle reopens in May. We just don't know.
Thank you. Greg, one, I think when you think about affordable housing, it's part of the discussion is what Mark's talking about. It's sort of the details of lining up the capital stack to make those things happen. It's about the construction of units. But your expertise and why you've been successful and why DHIC has been successful is because you're creating neighborhoods through various partnerships. Can you talk about the importance of bringing together other players into those sort of projects, and typically who are those players?
Sure. One of the great partnerships that we've had recently that's evolved over time is with the Presbyterian Church. Some of you may be familiar with Capitol Towers Apartments out near North Hills on Six Forks Road. It's Raleigh's largest seniors affordable apartment community, 296 units there. And it was developed by the Presbyterian Church 40 years ago. And they had a nonprofit board of directors that, met monthly and with their property management company and tried to make decisions about rent arrears, and if somebody's not paying, or maybe if they have bed bug problems, they were on it as volunteers. But they recognized that they needed to renovate the building, that it had significant kind of major health and safety issues. So they asked DHIC to join them in partnership to do that work. And we're just completing a $25 million renovation there. But the way this came down is that basically the church group will lease the property to the DHIC affiliated developer at basically no cost for 75 years. And then that'll revert back to the church after 75 years. But we're committed to make it affordable over that 75-year period. That relationship then was built upon to carry over to Newbern Avenue, where the Milner Memorial Presbyterian Church was losing members, and it was no longer financially viable to keep the congregation there. And the congregation chose to dissolve. with the condition, and that property would revert to the regional body of the Presbyterian Church, with the condition that the church property would be used to provide affordable housing for lower income seniors. And again, so we worked with the Presbyterians there on that transaction. And by the way, we also worked with a group called Presbyterian Homes that owns retirement communities, including Glen Eyre out in Cary. And that's continued. So that's been great. Another partnership that I'll just highlight real quickly is over in Durham. We're completing Willard Street Apartments in downtown Durham, right adjacent to the bus transfer facility. And there we worked with Self-Help, and as a partner on this, along with the city provided the land to us, the city-owned land at $1. But furthermore, Duke University wanted to demonstrate their commitment to seeing an inclusive city, a diverse city that also was responsive to the needs of their very low-income citizens. And Duke University committed $2 million to this development. And A.J. Fletcher Foundation, associated with Capital Broadcasting, committed another $500,000. So there's kind of that anchor institution, the university committing dollars to affordable housing, I think was really significant too. So I think churches, I think that educational institutions, in some cases, healthcare providers, we're starting to see them getting more concerned about affordable housing. And so I think that all of those partnerships are, they're difficult to make, to get to one point, because you're kind of coming with different visions and different views, but so they do take some time. But I think that there are more opportunities out there to have such partnerships in place, particularly with the faith community.
Thank you, Greg. Sarah, I know you've been probably monitoring the chat line, and is there a couple of questions there we can throw to the group and respond to?
Yeah, that's great timing. I'm just going to do them in the order received. So we had one that asked, what can be done to reduce the property tax burden of low-income homeowners? A 0.21 acre lot has a building value of $52,000 and a land value of $160,000. This is an example from Sawyer Road.
Yep. Well, these things are often governed by state enabling legislation, and there's not a lot of wiggle room there. Greg, you have a thought about that?
I don't think I know the answer to that one, but maybe some city folks have dug into that.
Well, I will give an example that we're familiar with and we worked on in West Side Atlanta. A coalition of some of the biggest business interests in Atlanta decided that they needed to address the neighborhood conditions around the new football stadium, and have basically raised on the order of maybe $100–150 million privately to address issues of how do we keep people in place, controlling the increase in taxes on their homes. That's largely a private initiative, although it's sort of supported by the local government. It's not sort of initiated by local government. That's very unique. It's maybe unique to them, but there are options in some communities.
Oh, Ken,
Well,
please
one
go ahead.
more.
I saw we got Ken
Okay.
raised his hand. I'm sure has some great insight on that one.
I just wanted to say that you're correct about the state law being restrictive. In North Carolina, local governments have the authority to abate property taxes only for low-income seniors and veterans. And so other households, it's illegal. That said, the city can and does provide support to low-income homeowners in other ways beyond tax abatement to try to stay in their properties. And I think it is fruitful to talk about, expanding and enhancing that type of program. But in terms of direct property tax relief, it's very limited.
Thank you. Alexis, do you want to make a comment? And then we're going to probably take a 5-minute break.
Sure. So I'm weighing in from kind of the private the nonprofit side of things. I'm working with the Community Land Trust that's trying to get off the ground here in Raleigh. And one of the things that we've been exploring and seeing is the possibility of alleviating property taxes through the Community Land Trust model. And so homes that are sold to us, we are then able to pass along tax savings to homeowners. And so low income homeowners who would like to alleviate those pressures and prices that they're seeing raise in Raleigh through the CLT, we're able to kind of figure out a solution through that resale opportunity with future homeowners. And so what that could look like is a homeowner sells their home to us, we sell it back to them in some sort of buyback opportunity. And then because the land is now owned by the community land trust, we are paying the property taxes as a nonprofit versus the homeowner directly. And so that's just one thing that we've been exploring that's kind of talking about that topic, though not directly kind of on these large scale projects that you were discussing. So just wanted to share that.
That's a cool idea. Probably should follow up and learn a little bit more about that from you. At this point, I'd like to take a 5-minute break. I'm sure people would like a little break and maybe get something to drink and go to the bathroom, but come back in 5 minutes. We're going to get into our 2 case studies, and then we're going to move into the final piece of our program today. Thank you. 5 minutes is about 1 minute, Sarah, but I'll let you sort of pull the group together.
Sure. Yeah, I'll give him until 9:38 or so, and I'll see if a couple more cameras turn on, or yeah, maybe as they hear us talking, they'll pop back in. This has been a great discussion so far, and our attendees have asked some great questions as well. It's just good stuff all around.
Well, you guys are, as a community, highly sort of focused on this, and not every community is or don't have the same expertise or resources available. But yeah, this is a topic that's pretty important to your city.
We are very lucky to have panelists and community members like the ones that we have. I think that's well, yeah, I think if just gonna sort of call folks back to the table. I think I see a few more folks came back, and maybe we'll have some more joining. So yeah, if you're ready to proceed, Russ, we can go on to the next piece of the summit this morning.
Well, thank you, Sarah. And yes, we wanted to share two good examples that we researched and wanted to share with you today that sort of exemplifies all the sort of complexity and the opportunities that exist in other communities that have existed in Raleigh too, because we're going to show you an example. Both of these are historic African-American neighborhoods that have been sort of had difficulties over the years with interstates passing through them. You name it, they've experienced it. Both about started in the 1950s, fell into disrepair. They're much larger in terms of multi-phase redevelopment projects. They're basically recreating neighborhoods. There was issues of displacement concern. They try to achieve mixed use. They use all forms of financing tools. The first one in Charlotte is the sort of the project of Dream Key Partners. They were formerly Charlotte-Mecklenburg County Housing Partners, sort of a nonprofit similar to DHIC. They were brought in by the city to work on the Greenville neighborhood, which was basically essentially destroyed by Interstate 77. That started their efforts in Charlotte. And they have sort of gained the expertise as a developer to go into neighborhoods that the private market was never going to take on. These are mostly redevelopment projects. They've served as a master developer, and now they sort of are reaching the conclusion of a project called Bright Walk. It's an 80-acre development. This is what it looks like today. You'll see in a second what it looked like before that, and obviously just a stone's throw from the CBD. Double Oaks Apartments is what it was called. It's a historic African-American neighborhood. You'll note that these are barrack-style housing, which, you know, I don't think ever was going to be sustainable from the very beginning. And they fell into disrepair, and then the recession hit, and the market started to wane in 2007 to 2010. It went into foreclosure, and that's when Dream Key Partners sort of stepped in and tried to address this issue. It took them several years just to sort of plan it and anticipate what was necessary. In 2007, they intervened with an acquisition loan from Wells Fargo Bank, Wachovia Bank at the time. And they had to relocate 350 residents. They had to demolish all the units, 573. They made it clear to people that you can come back once we're starting to rebuild. People saw the writing on the wall. They had to get their lives together, and they moved out. Only 10 to 15% came back. There was a 4-acre property that was sort of the source of a lot of police calls and crime. Today, that's essentially gone. Now it's more likely it's moved elsewhere, but now that's the location of a market rate housing development. And they got LEED neighborhood certification, which is pretty impressive. So it's a very sustainable community, and they're on a public transit line as well. So here's the development, 778 new housing units, 369 are single family units that are market rate, and the multifamily is mostly tax credit projects. So those have subsidies. And they had the lead with the multifamily because as the recession was hitting and we were coming out of it, multifamily was what was most likely to get financing. So they started with that. It was probably necessary. And then the ownership side sort of evolved over time and has been very successful. They're still selling out this single family homes. Now, this is really the success story. And I think Greg will share the fact that Washington Terrace tries to build a quality product. So we had barracks and now we have this, which is very high quality. You can see the number of units associated with these different phases. Some are apartments, some are apartment homes. Most of them are accessible to people making 60% AMI and below. And all of them have elements, at least most of them have elements at 30%. So very successful. They have done their homework and sort of teed up these opportunities over time and developed a good reputation as a result. On the ownership side, they have townhomes, they have single family homes. These are not large homes by any stretch, but they're fairly expensive homes. And they didn't attempt to subsidize these, but I will tell you that they had to wait longer for these to come online. Their intent all along was to have market rate. Fred Dodson, who sort of is the COO, shared with me a story that they had a community meeting last year where they had homeowners and rental tenants come over for a community meeting. They were talking about the success of these subsidized rental units, and the homeowners, a couple of homeowners said, "Hey, where's the subsidized units?" And I said, "Well, right across the street." No one really knew and no one really said anything, and it didn't really matter, but it sort of brings home the point that they should look different. They all should be high quality, and they've been able to achieve that. Here's the partners they used. They had the county come in and provide recreational facilities. They were able to attract a brewery to sort of bring a different feel to the neighborhood. Michael Jordan, who's Novant Health Clinics, decided to create a presence here. They have an aquatic center. The city, the Bank of America, and Wells Fargo have all been at the table, sort of supporting their efforts. So this is very much a community effort to rebuild this neighborhood, and they are experiencing a great deal of success. Now, here's sort of probably the major elements that they use to fund this project. Everything from traditional bank loans to HUD loans to LIHTC, which is a part of all of these projects. They have a trust fund, they have an infrastructure fund. So it really is about bringing all these resources together. They even got the city to commit 10 years of their CDBG money at 1.5 million a year to provide infrastructure and everything they would need to be successful. And here's a good summary of the folks that they work with on a regular basis to pull their projects off. And these are the major players in many respects that are doing things across the country and in the affordable housing realm. Washington Terrace is very similar in terms of its time frame and the quality of development. It's not as large. It's 23 acres. Originally had 246 rental units. Greg's group put a great deal of effort into the civic engagement process, really sort of engaged with the community to understand what the needs were. Over 350 residents participated. So this is a mixed in community, rental, home ownership at different price points, different product types, which is important. You want to attract people of varied backgrounds, and they have different needs that need to be met. The rents remain essentially the same for legacy residents. So, this is a real success story, and it doesn't come just in the form of housing. There's daycare, there's gardening programs, there's this is really a community, and all the things that go to create a community are present. Multi-phase project started in 2014. Here are your different elements. We'll get into that a little bit more. It's all master planned. So this is not something that wasn't anticipated. They're very close to closing out the project over the next several years. This is a village at Washington Terrace, garden apartments, townhomes, You see the pricing here that sort of falls within that affordability range that we talked about earlier. The community center and gathering room, kitchen, conference room, childcare. This is all sort of what people anticipate and expect. Maybe they don't always get in other communities, but I think if you're not thinking along these lines at this level, then you're probably maybe cutting the opportunity short. I think what we've seen in the past in other communities is that there's not as much effort put into the process of creating community. So they become housing developments that sort of erode over time. This is Booker Park North apartment homes, 72 apartment homes. You see the targeted income levels and how they break out. Again, the rent's very affordable. And 36 legacy households are benefiting from an internal subsidy. So everyone is sort of being addressed here in terms of what they're looking for housing types, what their ability to pay is. This is essentially the first two phases and where the funding sources came from. You see LIHTC is big in both of these, but also Freddie Mac as a foundation loan. So again, I don't think any of these projects are the same each time. I mean, you have to sort of create the capital stack that fits the need and who the investors are. Subsequent phases that are coming online, these are senior apartments. So these are people age 62 and older. 25% are sort of at 30% and below. So this is a segment of the population that needs affordable housing, and not everyone can go into assisted living. This is an option for them. That project starts later this year. And then we come in with the townhomes as the final phase of the development. 17 units will be affordable to those making 80% of AMI. And obviously, when you get into a ownership unit that has a different price point, then you're talking about extending those AMI limits a little bit higher. It's very difficult for someone making 30% AMI to own a home. So that's sort of the reality of that. I will sort of pass this to Greg just to sort of get a clarification on sort of the thought process behind this project and give us a little context. I gave the details, but you were involved in this, and what do we need to know about this project that really made it successful?
Well, I've got a few DHIC team members
Great.
on the call, and I might pass this off to Yvette Holmes, who really helped us with our public participation process. Yvette, you still there? Maybe not.
All
right.
I am here, but I'm gonna leave it with you, Greg, because you're the presenter. Okay. Thank you, though.
Yeah. Well, I think that to me, what was most significant here was our commitment and to not displace anybody. That was really, we went to great efforts to move folks around as we did this in phases, to make sure that they were, we had a resident care program that really focused on the attention that we placed to the residents, helping them move, helping them get back in, and you know, just the, I guess our singular commitment to the residents, I think, was really the most striking aspect of this and most successful part of it. You know, this is a development that, you know, we talk a lot about gentrification and the like, and what's the answer to this? And in my mind, one of the answers is that you got to create permanently affordable rental housing in some of these communities if you really want to maintain diversity. That it's harder in a home ownership context to ensure that, but by doing a community like we have here at Washington Terrace, and it's still got some more work to do, that we can ensure that this part of town will have some economic diversity in the years to come. And,
now, you guys did something fairly unique in the sense that you added more units than you started with. So you sort of had greater density at the end, which, you know, is sort of counter to recent trends where we've gone from older public housing that was very dense, and we tried to sort of thin that out a little bit and come in with mixed income, mixed use in terms of like a Hope 6 model. Tell me a little bit that went in behind that sort of decision to get more units here.
Well, I think we wanted to make an impact on the community and add more units than we actually had. I mean, that was an explicit goal of ours, more affordable units, yet still have ownership opportunities and the like. I do think that this is consistent with what we're seeing in in-town neighborhoods too, with greater density. You know, we're talking about adjusting the ordinance to allow ADUs, and a lot of this has happened already, allowing more missing middle housing for triplexes, duplexes and the like. And I think that this density here is not inappropriate for an in-town use. You know, we're right adjacent to St. Augustine's University dormitories that are roughly 3- and 4-story and 5-story high. So I don't think that this is inconsistent with what we'll see elsewhere in the city. Along transit corridors, for example, along New Bern Avenue, I think we'll see more density along there. And so that I think that worked well for us.
When the project started, the 246 rental units, were they occupied, partially occupied?
When we purchased the property, I think we had about 200 units occupied. And through attrition, we got down to about 100 when we were getting ready to move folks into the first phase of this. And some held off. Some went to the Village of Washington Terrace. Others who were seniors waited until Booker Park North came to be. And that was an age-restricted community. So, you know, but everybody had a chance to move back on in at basically the same rent they were paying for the last 5 years under much different conditions.
Well, that's the good news in all this, and it was sort of phased smartly so people could make that transition within a reasonable period of time, didn't have to leave and hopefully come back. I think Fred Dotson said that if he could have got more people to come back, he would have felt better, but they didn't really have that option, I don't believe, given how quickly things came together. But maybe a good time to sort of take some questions from the audience. Sarah?
Yeah, Russ, I do have one that Danica asked, and she posed it to you and Mark, and I'm just going to read it. And I apologize, I'm jumping the queue with her question because I think it's important. How do you define affordability? What do you consider affordability? Do you believe that there's a difference between affordable housing for people on government assistance versus people who are in a working class family? I know it's a lot to unpack, and we need to transition over to small groups. So if you want to I think we should address Danica's question, and then I also want to offer to Danica and anyone else who wants to discuss this further. This is not the only time we can talk about this, but if we could address that, then maybe we'll move on to small groups.
Well, I presented a technical definition of that, and you know, that doesn't always reflect reality. 30% of gross monthly income is considered affordable. Anything above that is considered cost burden. A lot of America lives in a cost burden world, and they can't get to 30% or below. Do you have a more contextual definition, Greg?
Sorry, Danica asked Mark. I apologize. I just wanted to make sure her question was getting, not that Greg can't provide a great answer.
Oh, okay,
I just wanted to respect Danica's question.
Sure.
Well, yes. And so I had attempted a typed answer that, you know, what Russell described is the most widely accepted definition, that it's 30% of income on rent and utilities. And that comes from HUD, and that's been around for a very long time, but it's, you know, that's not necessarily the only way to think about it. And there certainly are circumstances where a household could choose to spend more than that and have that be a very rational and appropriate decision for their circumstance. And so
another way to think about it also is that some people say, well, let's include transportation into this, the housing element too, and add the cost of transportation, because that's something that people must pay typically too. And so that's another measure. And I think a 53% number is oftentimes used, somewhere around that range. Another way to think about it is that, you know, very, very low income folks, 30% of their income, they still don't have much residual income to pay for food and medical care, childcare, and the like. And so some people say that there ought to be a minimum residual income that folks have to cover those basic costs.
Sarah, is it okay? Is it okay if I just add a quick comment to that? Because I think I'm not trying to put words in anybody's mouths, but I think the question is like twofold: is what is the definition of affordable, which is 30% of your gross income for rent and utilities, and then what is the income percentage that we're trying to target, right? Because a lot of people use the terms 30% of area median income, 50% of area median income. And so the definition of affordable is around cost burdening by HUD, which is that 30% of your income for rent and utilities. It is then what household income are we trying to target to stay below that 30% of their gross income? And so like public housing programs oftentimes target maximum 50% or 30% of area median income. The low income housing tax credit program, which we're talking about, the requirements are either 20% of the units are priced at people earning at 50% of AMI, or 40% of the units priced at people earning 60% of AMI. And so that's really where the conversation of the community is what are we trying to target? Because whether you make $30,000 a year or $300,000 a year, there is a housing unit that is affordable to you, and there's a housing unit that's unaffordable to you. And so I just want to make sure that we're all understanding the nuance of, one is, what is the price appropriateness or making that 30% of AMI? And then two is, what incomes are we targeting to make sure that we have a diverse community of people that earn across a wide range of incomes? I just want to make sure that we're not trying to conflate the two. They are two separate things. And the conversation around what are the targets oftentimes are defined by the programs that are available to us, right? So if you're using LIHTC, like I said, they have specific requirements. Now you can go lower than that if you want to, but you can't go higher. And other programs will have different requirements. And so that's kind of where part of that conversation is who are we trying to serve and what are we trying to target?
Thanks, Kyle.
And in North Carolina, properties, tax credit properties in counties like Wake have to make 1 out of 4 units affordable to households at 30% of AMI. And that's, a lot of people talk about the tax credit program as being 60%, and that is one of the maximums, but it's not widely understood that that 1 in 4 units in any property in the county that's been awarded since, I think it's 2003, 1 in 4 of those units again have to be affordable to households at 30% AMI. Those owners also cannot discriminate against a potential resident because of having their source of income. They have a Section 8 voucher, and that's written into their deed restrictions. And so that can often be the only place in some areas where somebody can use that voucher.
Yeah, just following.
Sorry, Greg, I'm so sorry. We got to transition over to
sure.
small group. I know we could, it's a great discussion. Russ, could I kick it to you to do that? I just want to make sure we get everybody out by 10:30, although I would gladly spend all day with y'all.
Well, we have the next stage, which is kind of a 30-minute discussion, breakout discussion. And Sarah, you're going to basically split the group into how many groups?
Yeah, so we have 3 breakout rooms. Everyone has already been pre-assigned. So I'm going to click a button and you will get a message on your screen saying you have been invited to join breakout room number 1, 2, or 3. And you have a host and a scribe in there to take notes, and they will explain to you the activity more specifically. But in those breakout rooms, we're going to have everyone will be discussing the same 3 questions. So I'm going to hit the button to open all rooms. I'll be in the main room. So if anyone has any technical issues, I'm here to help you. So I'm going to open the rooms. We'll be chatting for about 20 minutes, and then we're almost done with our time together today. So, all right, rooms are open. Please go ahead and enter, and I'm here if you have any technical issues. Summer, do you need assistance getting into your breakout room? Okay, good. And Matt, you're good as well. Matt, do you need help getting into the breakout room? All right, and anybody who's in here, if y'all maybe are away from the computer right now, we've assigned you to breakout rooms. So if you could please join your breakout room. Nicole and Arnie, are y'all here? Maybe you stepped away. Okay.